for block number 10. This is block number 10. This is going to be the same steps for block 20, so this video will cover block 10 and block 20. So let's see what we need to get started. Okay, for block 10, you will need fabric or thread that matches those fabrics. You will need a thread that matches your fabric 7, which is your background fabric, and you will need thread that matches your fabric 5, and you will need matching bobbins for those threads only if you're adding your back while it's in the hoop. You will also need a water soluble thread and an embroidery bobbin thread. You will need a little strip of fabric 4, and your instructions will tell you exactly what size you will need. And then you will also need some strips of fabric from fabric 3 and fabric 5, and that's what this is for. And the 3 and 5 is going to be for these piece sections that are stitched and flipped right there. And you will also need a square of your fabric 7, and again the instructions will show you exactly what size to cut everything. If you are adding your wool, well, for added dimension in your quilt, you will need to have that ready and prepped. Cut it the size that we tell you depending on the block size you're making, and then press the edges in about 1/4 of an inch with your iron, and that'll help keeping your presser foot to get caught while it's stitching. And if you're adding your backing fabric, of course you're going to need a piece for your backing fabric as well. Step 1 I've already done. It might be a little hard to see in the video, but you can see that I've stitched an outline of where to place my wool, and that is done with water soluble thread, and so is the step we're going to do right now. Step 2. Step 2, I have my prepared wool, and I'm going to place it right inside the placement stitch from the first step. And the machine sews a zigzag stitch all the way around. Step 3, we're going to continue with water soluble thread, and we're going to sew the pattern onto the wool battleizer. If you didn't do the wool battleizer, you will sew that pattern directly onto the onto the battleizer. And all you have to do is just make sure that you're maybe pushing the wool down ahead of the presser foot. The other thing you can do is you can raise the height of your presser foot on your machine. If you're able to do that, you can raise that up as well, and that'll keep the foot from getting caught. For step 4, you still have water soluble thread in the needle, and you're going to start with your strip of fabric 3, and you're going to lay it right side up over this first section. Thread to clip here. But you're going to lay it right side up over this first section. Now this is a tiny section, so if you happen to have a scrap of fabric 3, you can use that here as well. And then the machine will sew a tack down stitch with the water soluble thread. Now we need to trim this fabric, so anything on the outside of the block you can leave approximately 1/2 inch there, and anything on the inside of the block where it's going to be a seam, you could do about 1/8 inch. And if it's on the outside of the curved edge where this section is, you can go a little bit more narrow than 1/8 inch, so we'll call it a scant 1/8 inch. Cut a little bit closer to the stitching. And now we're ready for step 5. For step 5, you're going to put just a neutral thread in the needle, and you're going to take your fabric strip of strip 5, and you're going to take it and place it right sides down, raw edges even with the last piece of fabric. And the machine will sew a seam. after it sews the seam, you're going to continue with the same thread, and you're going to flip the fabric right side up, and you're going to smooth it out and then finger press it, and the machine will sew a tack down to hold it in place. Alright, so now that I have the tack down of this piece of fabric, I am going to go ahead and do some more trimming. And again, it's the same philosophy. If you have something that's hanging off on the outside of the block, you can just leave that excess fabric there. Any fabric that is going to have the next seam sewn to it, you can cut that approximately 1/8 of an inch or a scant quarter. Anything, for instance, I have this little tip of fabric that's going off into this section. I'm going to go ahead on an angle and just cut that so that that is not showing when we cover it with our background fabric, which is our fabric 7 later. So basically, the next few steps are basically just alternating between your fabric 3 and your fabric 5, laying right sides down, raw edges even, sewing the seam, flipping, finger pressing, sewing the tack down and trimming, and continuing until you have this entire section filled up. Okay, I have finished stitching up through step 16. So we have all our stitch and flips done with this curved section here. So just make sure you have this trimmed about a scant 1/8 of an inch here. And also, so you know, there's a little section down here in the corner, you're going to also have to make sure that it's trimmed about a scant 1/8 of an inch because there is going to be a little bit of fabric 7 down here in the corner when the block is complete. So let's do the next step. Step 17, you're going to take your fabric 4 and you're going to lay it right over the placement stitches that we stitched earlier. You're going to put water soluble thread in the needle and you're going to sew a tack down. So once you complete step 17, like I said, while it was stitching, there's going to be 2 lines of stitching. The outside edge and then a longer stitch that you'll see on the inside edge. The inside edge stitch is basically just a place to mark the edge of a flange that we're going to put on here. But before we do that, you're going to take your little hoop scissors mini and you are going to trim the fabric on the outside about a scant 1/8 of an inch, almost right up to the stitching. Anything on the outside of the block, you can leave that there for right now. Now, this is one of the pieces of fabrics that I failed to tell you in the beginning when we were gathering all our supplies, but it is on the supply list. You will need a 45-degree flange. It's a strip of fabric that's cut on a 45-degree angle, and it is 1 1/4 inches wide. Then you're going to press it in half lengthwise, and I'm just going to cut a piece that makes it so it hangs about a 1/2 inch over on all the outside edges for the top here. And you can see my folded edge is going to be meeting and matching right up to that inside line of stitching. So let me cut the next piece for on this side. Make it extend a little bit. The reason we have it cut on a 45-degree angle off the bolt is because it has a slight curve to it, and it'll work much easier for you if you have that curved, or on curved edges it works better if you have something cut on a 45-degree angle versus a straight of grain. So I'm going to move those flange pieces off of there for a second, and I have some glue basted, temporary basting glue, and I have the tip on it that gives a real fine point, and I'm just going to put little dots, almost microscopic cute little dots. And with the folded edge, you're just going to put the folded edge right up to cover up that inside line of stitching. And just press it together with your fingers and hold it there momentarily. And it really does hold quickly, so it's not like you have to hold it there for a long time. And we're also, since it's right in this area, you don't really have to worry about the needle stitching through it and it being wet. But although I have done that, and I will say that I haven't had my needle gummed up very much at all, if actually at all. So there's my little dots of glue, my folded edge, which will go right along the inside line of stitching, leaving 1/2 inch on the outside edges of the block. You might see a little glue squirting out there, and that's fine because it is a temporary glue. It's great for applique, holding things in place on a permanent basis until we can get it stitched down. And I will usually give this like maybe a minute or two, and then I will go over to my machine and stitch it. So actually we could probably do it right now and it would not be a problem. So let's go do that. Okay, I'm ready for step 18. I have water-soluble thread in my needle and I have my flange glued down. If you don't have glue, there's a product called Wonder Tape, and it's 1/4 inch double-sided tape that's water-soluble, and you can also use that to hold that flange in place temporarily until you're able to stitch it. Just another option. So we're going to go ahead, and the machine is going to sew a tack down stitch, and it's going to sew. I'm going to cut a thread tail, and it's going to sew that down with 2 lines of stitching because we're going to trim this close to the stitching when we're finished. For some reason I just want to hold it in place, but I don't need to because it's already glued down. Old habits. As you can see, I've already trimmed close to the stitching on this part right here, and I'm going to do the same thing at the top, just using my little hoop scissors minis to do that. Just wanting to get hung up on the wool. There we go. So that is how you trim it. For step 19, we're going to take our square of fabric 7 and we are going to center that right over the entire block. So I like to lift up, center it where I think it's right, and then peek underneath to make sure that I have it even on both sides and also on the top and bottom. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to still have water soluble. So the machine will go ahead and sew the tack down stitches using the water soluble thread. Make a little fabric adjustment here. All right, we are all set to go. So I'm just going to make sure the fabric doesn't move, or that we don't have any puckers or anything sewn into each area. It's going to tack down the same piece of fabric in 3 different areas. Cut a thread tail. And again, you will see it doing 2 lines of stitching right over the top of it in a couple of different areas. And those are the areas that you will be trimming your fabric close to the stitching. one more little part to stitch down here in the far corner. All right, now we can trim that fabric away. Okay, so we have our fabric 7 tacked down. Now there's some areas we're going to have to expose. And if you look at the picture in your instructions, you'll be able to see that easily. So it's going to be this area we're going to cut out, as well as this area right here. And your instructions will show you basically the same thing, that we are going to cut close to the stitching right here, right here, right here, and also down here. And those are the areas that we're going to be exposing. The areas not marked are the areas that are going to stay on there. So for instance, I'm going to start out by using my hoop scissors mini to cut right along this inside edge. Don't worry about cutting on the wrong side of the fabric, that stays, because we did stitch the corners down so you can't get your scissors in there very easily. I'm going to cut this corner away. So you can see we have that section exposed, and now we're going to expose this section up here. And we're going to expose the flange slash piping, whatever you want to call it, and as well as this pretty periwinkle fabric. All right, I gotta clean that up a little bit, and then we can go to machine and we can continue with our block. For step 20, you're going to put thread in the needle only that matches your fabric 3, which for me is the darker purple, and it'll sew a satin stitch. You still have your embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin. For step 21, I have put thread in my needle only that matches my fabric 4, and we're going to sew a satin stitch. Step 22, if you're adding the backing welts in the hoop, this would be when you would do it. So you would just take your square of fabric and you would just center it right over the outline of your block that you can see on the back of your hoop. And as you can see, it clings nicely. The next step would be then to put it back on the machine, and with water-soluble thread, sew the tack down stitch to hold that in place. If you are not going to put backing on welts in the hoop, then you would just leave it on there, change to water-soluble thread, and you still need to do the tack down stitches. There are some areas that don't have the basting stitch on the outside, so we're going to go ahead and complete that, and that'll give you something to trim against. For step 23, we are going to do a little bit of quilting up here in this upper left-hand corner for block 10. And you can use the thread of your choice. You can choose what color. This is the area on the backing fabric that does a lot of real pretty feather quilting. So you want to use the same color every time you do that step in any of your blocks. So write that color on your instructions. Also, if you have your backing fabric on and you've chosen to add the backing while it's still in the hoop, make sure that you also match your bobbin thread to your needle thread. The other thing you'll need to do so that you have a pretty looking back is you'll need to turn off your automatic thread cutter. And you'll also need to do needle down and needle up to bring that bobbin thread to the top, which I've already done. I'm holding on to the two of those. And also when you begin stitching, hold on to those thread tails. Take a few stitches, stop the machine, and cut the thread tails. That'll keep anything, any ugly stitching or bird's nest or anything from appearing on the back of your block. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread tails and then let it finish. Step 24, you're going to use thread that matches your fabric 7, and you're going to put it in the needle only if no back, and a matching bobbin if you do have your back on. And again, follow all those tips I mentioned in the previous step. Step 25, you can put the color of your choice inside this purpley blue area where it's going to be stitching. Just make sure again you write down the color and you keep it consistent all the way through the circle area in the quilt. And remember, if you have the backing on, remember to bring your bobbin thread up to the top for a nice cleaner looking back. Last step, which is step 26, you're going to put thread in the needle and also in the bobbin, only if the back is on, and then you're going to sew some quilting right here in this area. Here is my completed block 10, so I can now take it out of the hoop. Always write, or I always should write, and you should too, the block number on the back of your block at the top. If you do have your backing on, then after you go ahead and get it trimmed, then you can always write it in the seam allowance real tiny, and that will help you put your puzzle together once your quilt is finished. So what you will do now is you will use your trimmer by George, and you'll use the metal edge to remove the bulk that will be in the seams. And you can watch the video that is on our website and also in some of our other videos and exactly how to do that. And basically the trimmer by George is going to remove the bulk, and then you trim your fabric to the front to 1/4 inch from the basting stitch. That way all your bulk is removed, so when you sew your blocks together you don't have that bulk in the middle of your seam. So this is our block 10. Our block 20 is basically the same. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been helpful.